Good morning and welcome to our first annual MTEK Summit, where we talk everything emerging tech. If you don't know me or us, my name is Jeff Klenner, president of EVOTEK. EVOTEK was designed to bring disruptive technology to the enterprise. We have practices that span enterprise architecture to data center to the public cloud. We have a sophisticated cybersecurity group led by former CISOs and staffed with engineers and architects that spent their careers as practitioners, half on the customer side as well as half on the vendor side. About 2 years ago, we created EVOTEK Labs with the charter to bring emerging tech to the enterprise. It's the culmination of all of those activities that brought us right here to our first annual MTEK Summit. And so we're going to talk about 3 topics that we believe are relevant to the future as it pertains to emerging tech: tomorrow's data center, tomorrow's call center, and tomorrow's security. It's my great honor to kick off the first session, which will be Fireside Chat format. It'll be led by Mark Campbell, our Chief Innovation Officer and the leader of EVOTEK Labs, as well as Enrique Salem, partner at Bain Capital and also former colleague. With that, I invite everybody who's joined us this morning to enjoy the data, enjoy the conversation, and enjoy the material that we've prepared for you today. Thank you.
We've got a terrific guest here. You heard Jeff in the introductions talk about Enrique Salem, but let me give you a little bit of background. I'm going to give you the dish here, okay? So Enrique, he's like a hardcore IT guy. He's got like a degree in computer science and everything, but he took that kind of in a different route until he became the CEO of Symantec. And you guys all know Symantec, right? Multi-billion-dollar company. Enrique led it through some of its most transformational years. He later skipped ship, went over to Bain Capital, where he is right now. Now, Enrique focuses on infrastructure and services, but you can imagine he's got a pretty rock-solid background in security. But check this out. I'm going to rip off the names of about, I don't know, a dozen or so companies that Enrique sits on the board for. So check these guys out. This is kind of an all-star lineup here. Enrique sits on the boards for MoveWorks, DocuSign, Nightfall AI, Ativo, Clary, Netscope, Atlassian, Evident.io. That's former before it got bought, and Enrique bought like his 19th house up in Napa. CloudGenix, another acquisition, and one that's near and dear to my heart, Jupiter One. If you guys that are attending the security track later, Jupiter One's going to be in there. I think you guys are going to be super impressed. So that's a little bit of background. Now you know the big hitter that we brought in here. So I'm going to throw a question at you there, Enrique. So you piloted Symantec through some of its best years, a ton of acquisition. What was the hardest thing you encountered running one of the largest security companies on the planet?
Yeah, look, I think when you run Symantec, you've got a company that is in probably 50 plus countries in the world, and you've got a diverse set of customers. You're trying to serve an individual consumer with our Norton products all the way to the largest enterprises and governments in the world. And so you really have to think through, how do you build products that serve those different markets? And it's really tough, quite frankly, because as you look at the world's biggest companies, they don't want a bunch of disparate tools that they can't operate and run. They're looking for things that they can operationalize. And so I think managing a portfolio across a wide range of customers was tough. But I will tell you, the other thing that mattered the most to me, and today is probably as important as ever, given the competition for talent, is really, how do you continue to bring on the best people in the world? I mean, the people who can engage with customers and be successful, but can also build great software. And I feel great about the talent Symantec had, and before we sold to Broadcom, because some of those folks have gone on to do amazing things. Lead many companies and have big roles. But I would say the complexity of running a big company was really, how do you serve lots and lots of different customers?
Yeah, and you certainly did. You mention kind of the global aspect around that. And so I imagine that in different markets, there's different, certainly in the security world, different threats and so forth. But that security background, I think, gives you kind of a unique position to predict how things might look in the future. So I know right now, security is top of mind for every company. It's kind of a cliche, but where do you think things are going to be heading in the next couple of years?
It's interesting. I started working for Peter Norton back in 1990. Yeah, so that's why you see these white hairs here on my face. It's been 31 years since I worked initially inside of what was Norton Computing pre-Symantec, and back in 1990 when we started to deliver what would be the first generation of anti-malware, antivirus, we were dealing with threats that were on floppy disks. I mean, I don't know the last time I saw a floppy disk. I don't think I have, for a long, long time. But now you deal with threats that are, much faster moving. And if I just roll the clock forward, what has really been transforming and making security more complicated is just the interconnectedness of all of us, right? Because before, when you had an isolated device that was never connected to anything, that was relatively easy to secure. But in the mid 90s, we moved into everything got hyper connected. We now could start, doing things over the internet. Then we moved to, the advent of the iPhone, the smartphone, the iPad, and we started doing more from remote devices. And so what's continued to happen is the attack surface has just gotten bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So what you really have to think about, Mark, this doesn't change whether you're on a smartphone or building a application on a cloud platform like AWS, is you got to think about what you're trying to protect. And I see this notion of data, right? Where is the data you care about? How do you classify that data? How do you figure out what matters, what needs to be kept confidential, what can be shareable? Continues to be one of the most important challenges. I look at it, and what I see happening is the sophistication of the attacker is continuing to increase. And why is that happening? Is because the attackers now aren't just, a hacker or a thief. These are nation states. This is the Chinese government. This is the Russian government. This is, Iran. This is, nation state actors who are highly incented to come after their targets and steal data. And so where's the world headed? I really believe that we need to get very focused on what's the data that matters, how do we protect it effectively, and you mentioned some of the companies I'm working with. What I like about many of the companies is they try to say, what are my assets? Is that an on-prem asset? Is that sitting in a colo? Is that a cloud-based asset? And then what do I do to protect it? And I think that's what you've got to think about, is no matter where your data is or what asset you're trying to protect, you got to see it and understand how to protect it.
Well, and certainly protecting it from some sort of incursion, exfiltration. That's going to be the challenge for the foreseeable future. But even with inside an enterprise perimeter, privacy and protecting the customer's data, that's getting to be not just important for the business, but there are laws out there now that if you're not compliant with them, even if you haven't been breached, this is big stuff. How do you think privacy laws and compliance are going to affect the industry going forward?
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, it's not only is the attack surface getting bigger, but because so much data is known about each individual and can be unfortunately exploited by either a malicious actor or a corporation who's trying to take advantage of that data, you are starting to see, and it started with GDPR in Europe, where it became clear that you have to be able to have better controls on your personal data. The notion of, I want everything about me to be eliminated, forgotten, right? And this is a challenge. This is not easy. If you didn't design the appropriate controls and design the appropriate mechanisms for complying with these regulations, it's complicated. And so, GDPR was the beginning. In California, for many of us who are in California, there's now CCPA. And so these regulations are going to continue to expand across the globe and across the United States. Now, what makes it really hard, Mark, and it's one of the challenges I talk to people about all the time, is these regulations are not consistent, meaning there are different things you have to do by jurisdiction, and so that makes it a bit harder for people to comply with. One of the top issues, though, that we're all dealing with is data locality, data sovereignty. So if you're in Germany, you want to know that your data about German citizens or German activity is still residing in Germany, because there's some pretty strict laws from a privacy perspective. And so Germany, Switzerland, and other countries. And so a lot of technology companies, a lot of people are thinking about this notion of data locality, which I think is a non-trivial issue, especially if you haven't designed it in. And, Mark, I'll give you one other one that is interesting. A lot of people talk about FedRAMP, FedRAMP certification and working with the federal government. Again, FedRAMP is complicated when you try to build FedRAMP into a solution after the fact. If you think about data separation from day one and data controls from day one, it makes it a lot easier. But this notion of FedRAMP, the notion of data privacy regulations, I really believe it's something that we're going to live with forever now, and you got to get ahead of it. You got to think about it as you're deploying new solutions, and retrofitting is painful.
Well, you bring up a good point on retrofitting. So if you're like an established incumbent market leader in your space, and you're looking to kind of change the plumbing after the house is built, that's kind of that's a very challenging set of activities you have to perform. Does that kind of open the door for, say, a challenger in an industry to come in day one, build from the ground up using the latest and greatest, and set for that? Does that open up the door for some challengers into some of the markets?
Well, what I think it does, if you think about it from both sides, there's a vendor side and there's the end user side. On the end user side, the companies who can get their arms around how to deal with these regulations effectively will be able to move more quickly. And let me be specific. We want to be able to use our customer data as a business. You want to be able to make an analysis and say, here's a set of characteristics about an individual that I can potentially use for knowing how to serve them better. But if you don't have the right design for how you control that data or manage that data, you end up in a situation where you can't innovate as quickly. You can't deliver new products and services as quickly. And so to your comment, I do think companies who think through some of these strategies to comply with privacy regs or other regulations are going to be able to move much, much more quickly. And so it does open up the door for companies that start with that lens to be more agile, be more innovative, and be more competitive.
Well, you mentioned data locality earlier, and certainly a lot of companies are looking to public cloud vendors to provide them that kind of the follow the sun model, but with data locality in mind. I'll ask you a little risky question here to speculate. Do you think in the near future, next few years, let's say, that we're going to see a large scale breach of one of the public cloud providers where they get in, they kind of get behind the protective moat and fortress walls and have run of the kingdom? Is that a bit speculative? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. So one of the things I always try to talk to folks about is first you got to zoom out. What you have is, all of the cloud providers really think about the world as a shared responsibility model, right? They say, we're going to try and protect our infrastructure, but when you build an application, you have to think about how do you protect your application, your data, who has access to it. And so it's this notion of being a shared responsibility model. When cloud computing first started, everybody used to say the big issue was security. They cared about, am I going to trust my data to be in a third party data center or infrastructure? And, quite frankly, what I was always trying to convince people of was that an Amazon, a Salesforce, they're going to hire the best professionals and they're going to work on how they control their environment very tightly. And quite frankly, they have the resources to hire tremendous expertise. And so I actually feel I'm confident that the Amazons, the Googles of the world are doing everything they possibly can. But the issue is it's like, why do banks get robbed? Because that's where the money is.
Exactly.
And so the problem, and so if you think about your question, Mark, it's they're a massive target, right? If you're a bad actor, you are going to go after where is there something potentially valuable to pursue. That said, though, I think it's harder for an attacker to pinpoint what they're trying to exfiltrate out of one of these cloud providers. It's easier for them to say, I'm going to target a insurance company, because I know that if I get inside the insurance company, they probably have 10 million, 50 million records of individuals that if I can figure out where that's stored, I can then infiltrate it. So are they a target? Absolutely. Will there be at the cloud providers meaningful data breaches and loss of personal data? Could happen. But I think that the attackers are probably going after different areas or opportunities to exfiltrate data. And so from my perspective, I don't lose a lot of sleep at night about an AWS, a Google, or a Microsoft being breached. But it is a target. So you should have the appropriate controls on both sides. So if you're putting data into a cloud provider's infrastructure and it's customer data or PII, you should be thinking about what controls you have. Do you have encryption? Do you have the right level of complementary controls in case there is a breach? Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they're not going to get breached because they're such a big target.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And certainly the public cloud is one area, let's say, outside the traditional enterprise perimeter. But we're also seeing a ton of growth in IoT, OT, at the edge, mobile devices, which creates kind of this real fuzzy perimeter that's out there, the soft underbelly, if you will. How do you think the let's say the startup community, but even incumbent solutions out there are going to be tackling this in the next few years going forward?
Well, I think what you want to think about is, there's going to be, I've heard numbers from 20 to 30 billion connected devices. And, that number, it doesn't really matter. At this point, it's such a big number that the magnitude of it means they're pervasive, right? If you look at an office, there's how many connected devices. If you look at a home, there's how many connected devices, right? I don't think there's a single office in the United States of any scale that doesn't have dozens, if not hundreds, of connected devices. And so what that means is, again, this is really, you got to start with, what are you doing that you want to really target, you want to really protect from the attacker? And so there's a lot of solutions out there today that are saying, first, let's start with visibility. Let me show you the devices that matter. Mm-hmm. Then they talk about, how do I corral or control them so I have some level of, whether it be enforcement capability that limits who has access to it. And then you talk about, unfortunately, we have to talk about remediation. And how do I then remediate? And the challenge, as you describe the network, Mark, and you think about, I over the hill, there's a hill out here outside my window, there's a big wind farm, right? There's a huge set of, big wind turbines. And, trying to think about those wind turbines and what access you have to them to control and maintain and manage security, it gets harder. And so what's happened when you think about this notion of have visibility, be able to control, that control component when you're on an oil rig in the middle of the North Sea, or a wind farm, in the middle of a big open area, or an oil field in the Bakken in North Dakota, it gets very, very hard to have the ability to control those devices. And so a lot of the creativity is going to come in around, how do you work in these loosely connected, disconnected environments? And so there's a lot of opportunity from a manageability and security perspective as we think about OT and IoT.
Yeah, well, you did mention something a little bit earlier when you're talking about some of the compliance out there. We've got a body of, let's say, a patchwork of laws out there, sometimes conflicting, sometimes overlapping, sometimes with big gaps in it. I know that governments and law enforcement are trying to kind of close that up. Are they in a losing battle? I mean, let's face it, right? The bad guys don't have to play by the rules. So governments and law enforcement, in many respects, are playing a catch-up game. Do you think they're in the future we're going to see more of an emphasis into cybersecurity, and will those tables turn, or can they?
I'll take you back a little bit. I had a chance to testify for the Senate Commerce Committee a number of years ago, and they were trying to think about this question that you just asked, Mark, which is what can the legal system actually do to try and curtail, prevent, protect? And it gets really hard. We don't have a lack. And when one of the senators said to me, we don't lack for laws. I mean, and we can pass new ones. The challenge we have is the enforcement and the jurisdictional control that our laws can have. And, in cyber, the challenge is that the attacker doesn't have to be on US soil, right? The attacker could be anywhere in the world. And so, the challenge that regulators and lawmakers are always going to have is a couple of issues. One is jurisdiction. Two, enforcement. Three is attribution, right? What is the actual source of the attack? And so, from my perspective, I don't see how laws can really make a meaningful impact on the deterring the attacker. What I think they can do is they can potentially help us think through that as public companies or businesses, we do need to take the appropriate precautions to protect what we've been entrusted with. And if we don't, we're going to have to, make that public. And so, as you know, there's a lot of breach notification laws that have been put in place, which I actually support. I actually do think that as a shareholder of a company, if something happens that can affect the success of that company going forward, I think you should have to disclose it. I think it's a mistake if you say to people, I lost 100 million records of customer data and I could keep that private. I think that would be a mistake. But I don't think that laws will ultimately, Mark, be able to really deter an attacker. And I think it really comes down to this notion of attribution and jurisdiction.
Well, so you mentioned jurisdiction, and the baddies don't have to be, sitting in the same city, county, state, or even continent as their targets. Do you think we're going to see, kind of a banding together? I know this is already happening, but like in the future, to where there will be like, I don't know, like the, global cyber police or something.
Interpol.
I don't want to get dystopian, but I mean, something like that. I mean, if you've got kind of this amoebic villain, if you will, out there, are we going to have to get as amoebic on the law enforcement side? What do you think?
Well, for sure. Look, I think that historically there have been organizations like Interpol, and so I think you definitely have this idea that collaboration is important. But I'll tell you, we can do a better job just collaborating inside the U.S. So I think that there's a real good opportunity. You mentioned some of the largest cloud providers in the world. There's a lot of data that if we could figure out a way where it doesn't violate privacy, one of the other topics, and you could figure out how to share this data effectively, between the public sector and the private sector, we might have a better chance of protecting ourselves. But I think outside of trying to do global collaboration, I'd love to see some programs and some efforts to do better collaboration in this country. And that's why we formed, some of you are familiar, I'm sure, with like the FS-ISAC, which is, an ISAC created in financial services. And I think that's really important because that sharing of information is critical, quite frankly. And inside of a vertical like power and energy, financial services, retail, effectively sharing what's going on, what are you seeing, what are the techniques, even though they may be competitors, two retailers being competitors. I think sometimes sharing best practices so we can keep the bad guys away or share data is really important.
Yeah. Well, let me kind of take that a step forward then. Earlier you had brought up the issue of nation states being involved. Would you say that we're in the early stages of the first cyber war? I mean, have shots been fired, so to speak?
For sure. Look, I think that the level of sophistication of what nation states have today, and what do I mean by that? You look at what we call tier one actors. The U.S. is a tier one actor. China is a tier one actor. We'd say Russia, Israel. These are folks who have mature cyber offense and defensive capabilities. And this isn't the programs they started a few weeks ago. And what's going on is they have done extensive work both on the offensive and defensive sides to know what they would do. Have we seen cyber, nation state attack another nation state? Look, I don't know that it's been specifically country A attacking country B, and the public sector, but there's definitely been nation state attacking business and nation state attacking a repository of data to, like the OPA breach, the Office of Personnel and Management, when the federal government, I think there was, I won't remember the exact number, 20 to 30 million records that were stolen. That was a nation state actor. Yeah. And so I don't know how you would look at something like that and not say it's an act of war. We talked about the sunburst, the attack on SolarWinds that we saw late last year. Again, that's an act of war. I mean, it's a different form of war. There was no airplane flew overhead, but it was ultimately a form of attack, and everything points to it was a nation state behind that attack. So are we seeing the new forms of warfare? Absolutely. And this is why, I mentioned earlier that the opponent is now incredibly well funded. This isn't, four friends trying to do some hack to steal some data or some money. This is a nation state that's well funded, hundreds of millions of dollars going after specific targets.
Well, on that cheery note, I'm going to switch.
Look, the good news is that we're the good guys. Mark, look, the good news is, I've been in this business now, 30 years, and I think that there are things we can do to be better protected. Now, you got to remain vigilant, and if you don't remain vigilant, bad things are going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I want to remind the viewers that if you have a question, go ahead, throw it in the chat, and we'll get it in. We'll get it in front of Enrique and hear what his thoughts are on it. Just fire those out. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about your role at Bain. So, with your background in computer science, security, what made you wake up one morning and say, you know what, I think venture investment is where I need to be?
Well, I got to take you way back, Mark. I graduated from college and I went to work at a really big bank. And, I go to work and I had a PC on my desk and I had an IBM terminal. And, that IBM terminal in the mornings, some mornings it would be connected to the mainframe. Sometimes it wasn't. I did say mainframe, Mark, in case you're wondering. So that I'm taking you back a little bit. But it was connected to the mainframe, and some mornings it wouldn't work. And I used to get to the office pretty early, and I'd say to folks, "So why is it that this terminal doesn't work sometimes?" And they said, "Well, if you go talk to the network operations team, they'll give you the reasons." And so I went over there and I talked to one of the guys. And he said, "Well, what happens is every day when I get to work, there's a list of new people who have either joined the company or left the company, and I've got to edit this thing called a network control program. It's called an NCP. And if I make a mistake, the way the NCP is structured, the program that's reading it will stop at that line I made a mistake on, and everybody after that will not be on the network, if you can believe it." So, if you think about it, and I said, gosh, I think I can fix this. And so I left and started a company a year after I graduated from college to fix this specific problem. And so I think I was 22 years old. I graduated when I was 21. So I was 22 when I started the company. And I realized how much I loved this idea of solving problems or working with an innovator. And so I think at the end of the day, I spent the next 20 plus years working inside of bigger companies. And what I realized was, when you get to a big company, you still are doing some innovation, but a lot of the innovation is either happening inside of a research lab at companies like IBM, or it's happening in startups. And so what I felt was where I could go have an impact was really get out there and try to find really interesting entrepreneurs that were trying to solve problems, like when I was trying to solve that NCP gen problem. And so I felt like the next phase of my career, I was going to try and find the best entrepreneurs I could, invest with them as early as possible, and hopefully help them build some really interesting companies. And so, my sense is, now I've spent the last 8 years investing. You rattled off a number of companies, the DocuSigns, Atlassians, Ativos.
You've been busy.
Yeah, and look, these are, I get up every day and I get to work with some of the smartest people in our industry, and there's nothing I'd rather be doing.
Well, my next question maybe is a bit like asking you what next week's lottery numbers are, but like, how do you pick? I imagine you see many, many pitches before you find the one, hey, I'm going to write these folks a check. Like, what is it that is that trigger point that really sets apart the screened out versus screened in?
Yeah, so we look at, in each one of us in the venture practice here at Bain Capital Ventures at BCV, we probably look at 300 or 400 companies a year. And the screening process is pretty tough because some of these folks are so compelling. I mean, they are just, you can see that they walk into the room and you can see the energy and the passion for the problem they're trying to solve. So the first question I try to ask myself, Mark, is the problem they're solving something that a customer would say is a top 1, 2, or 3 issue that they want to go deal with? Or can it become that? Is it that interesting a problem? Because what I always try to share with entrepreneurs, if you don't make the top 2 or 3, 1, 2, or 3, you don't want to be 4, 5, or 6 because something will always pop in above you if you're 4, 5, or 6. So the first question I'm trying to ask, are you solving a problem that is going to make the top of the priority list? The second question I'm trying to ask is this a problem that's needed by a few customers, a few thousand customers, tens of thousands of customers, or hundreds of thousands of customers? And it's not that you don't want to build solutions that are for specific industries or specific verticals, but I'm trying to find opportunities that are very horizontal. So that's point 2. Point 3, I try to ask myself, how are they going to reach those customers? How easy is it for customers to see the value of the solution? Meaning, is it take me 2 months to set the product up and see the value or the problem they're solving? And if they can't get the product up and running relatively quickly with few integrations and show that value, it makes it less interesting. And then the last comment that I look at is this notion of operationalizing. Can they build a product that whoever deploys it can own it, operate it very effectively, and they don't have to hire 10 new people to run your product? So those are some of the initial criteria that I'm thinking about. Then I'm looking at the team. And is the team really have something special? Is it they're deep domain experts? Like when you mentioned Evident.io, which is a company that Palo Alto bought, and what we saw there was, Tim, the founder, had been at Adobe. This was the early days of moving to AWS, and people were seeing that it was hard to manage configurations. And so that was causing potential policy issues and potential breaches. And so Tim said, I'm going to go start a company to solve that problem. And so I'm always trying to figure out, what's the genesis story? Why is this person uniquely qualified to build this solution? Have they felt the pain? Do they understand the problem? Do they understand the target buyer. And in the case of Tim, he built the solution that he needed when he was the practitioner. So I'm looking for that. And then lastly, I'm trying to think about with the individuals, can they tell the story in a way that's compelling, that makes people want to go work for them? Because if they can't get people excited about joining them, as you know, this is a talent business. You got to have the best people to build the best companies. And so can they tell the story about why this is going to be, an incredible company, a special company? And so to me, that's some of the things I'm looking for in the people. Do they understand the problem they're solving? Are they uniquely qualified to solve it? And can they recruit? Can they tell the story in a way that attracts the best talent to go work with them?
Well, that's a beautiful segue into a question we got from our viewers here. It says, what do you think about the talent shortage in cybersecurity? Will we ever have enough good guys to defend these state actors? And if not, how do we close the gap on this issue?
This is a question that I've thought about quite a bit over the last 15, 20 years. The challenge we have, Mark, is if you look at our universities, and if you look at what we call STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math, we're graduating 150,000 people a year. Maybe that number will creep up a little bit. Call it, maybe it gets to 200,000. If you look at every company becoming a tech company, right? If you think about where the world is headed and why you've seen, valuations in the stock market, specifically around tech, do so well, is because every company is becoming a technology company at their core. They're building software. And so the challenge we have, to your question, is if you have 150,000 people graduating each year, and 3 to 5% of those folks are going to be cybersecurity professionals, we're talking 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people a year. You go and think about the, largest 10,000 companies in the United States. If there's 3,000, call it 5,000, each company can hire a half a person. It's like, so you just the numbers don't work. If we don't have enough people graduating with tech backgrounds, the number of security professionals is going to be smaller. We're going to be at 5,000 people a year, maybe 10,000, but that's not enough. So how do we solve this problem? Look, I think it starts with, we've got to get more people into technology. That's the first step. And that means starting people in programs, not waiting to college to really get them to understand what some of the opportunities are in the tech side. Obviously, computers are becoming more pervasive. Programming classes are more available. There's more access. But I think we've got to start earlier in training people in a tech skill set. And then we've got to create more curriculums around cybersecurity. Now, we're starting to see those specializations, right? We are starting to see many universities, many schools offering cyber practices, cyber training. But I think it really starts with, we've got to get not 100 to 150 graduates a year in STEM. We need probably 300,000 to 400,000. And look, I think there's a lot of efforts on the way, but we are in a big shortage right now. And I don't see that changing over the next 1 or 2 years. I think that's a 5 to 10 year journey where we can really change the total number of people interested in tech and in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I got you. You had mentioned valuations of tech companies being a little bit high. Let me segue into another question here. It says, we're seeing unprecedented valuations today. What's driving this, and will it last?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on right now. So I never want to try and time markets and tell you, will it last? Will multiples on revenue or on earnings be at this level for how long? The reason they are where they are, though, is because if you just take a step back, start with the fundamental of how we used to buy and sell software. When I sold a copy of, you pick whatever your favorite program is, 20 years ago, I would sell you a license, and then you'd have a maintenance fee, and that maintenance fee would be 20%, and you'd get the right to my updates, right? So the maintenance gave you some support and some updates. What's happened is we've moved to a different model, which is this idea of a subscription. And so we now have what we call annual recurring revenue or annual contract value. And because you now have this idea of recurring revenue, that business has a fundamentally better cash flow capacity or capability than our old license maintenance. So that's the first thing, is we've changed our business models and they're more effective. The second thing is, we're becoming more efficient in how we deliver technology to customers. And so, we don't ship, we deliver software digitally. So margins have improved. And so what's happening ultimately, I think, is you've got a much better business model. It's much more efficient. And so that means that there's a much higher level of profitability. And so from my perspective, the reason valuations have moved up is because the business models are better. Second, everything is becoming a tech company, as I said earlier, where you've really got this notion of more software is being utilized. There are 25 million developers today that are building more software. And so I think that you're seeing a rotation into, would I rather be in a tech company that's going to have more new customers and sell more software? Absolutely. And so that's why you're seeing valuations go up. Do I believe that there's further improvements and there'll be continuing demand? Tech's the future, right? You heard it here first, right? EVOTEK is in a good space because, people need your help, and there'll be more people who need your help. And so ultimately, I can't tell you if the market will trade up a little bit from here or down a little bit from here, but long term, I'm very bullish on the tech industry. And do I believe that tech, people can look at a stock today, you pick whatever company, and that company, if it's well run over a 10 or 15 year period, will be worth more then than it is today? I absolutely believe that. So betting on tech, I think, is a safe bet today.
Nice. And in our last minute here, apologies, we didn't get to hit all of the questions that came in, but let's just wrap up with one that kind of brings us right back around where we started. If you were starting your career today, what field in technology would you go into?
I'm a security guy at heart, Mark. I think if you really look at all the different areas, I really love security. And you know why I love security? It's because, every time I get a chance to talk to a customer, a family, we're the good guys. Security people are the folks who people are rooting for. They want you to win. They want you to be successful. And I've always felt that was a great area. So I've done security for 30-some years. I'd still go right back to security.
Sweet. Well, I'll tell you what, for everyone out there, let's do our hop-in applause, since we can't see or hear each other. But Enrique, amazing topics, amazing answers. I really appreciate you coming in and spending time with us today. This is tremendous. So for you folks out there, you will see Enrique in all kinds of articles and conferences and so forth. Now you've seen him in action. Don't miss him in the future. Awesome.
Thank you, Mark. Really a pleasure.